Okay, I brought along something called Science Explains What Happens to Your Soul After Death, and it features the thinking of the brilliant Dr. Stuart Hameroff, MD, and also the director of Advanced Conscious Studies at the University of Arizona, where he teaches philosophy. And his philosophy is based deeply upon his studies of quantum mechanics. In fact, I seem to remember you telling me that you went to his post, and it was all in mathematics.
Yeah.
Am I right?
Yeah, it was.
So I don't even bother to do that, but in the verbal world, I can get some grasp of what he's come to see. And so, I not even what's in this little paper. I can respond to it, and I just wrote a few ideas out in reference to it, and I think it would be cogent. Let me just read it. Hameroff has described the body as a supersystem. My explanation is to call it a temporary coalescence of energy that endures for a while and then stops functioning in this human world. But the energy endures. Hameroff says that the energy shifts into another dimension of the quantum field. Does that sound familiar?
Mm-hmm.
This article, on the other hand, says that it is possible to return home, i.e., to the quantum matrix. But they don't explain anything. There's so much that's left out of all this. I mean, this is a very brief article for people to peruse it. I went on. Perhaps that is possible for those who have transcended ego identity, a la the Buddha, to go beyond all attachment, all hang-ups, all negativities, all identifications, to completely let go of everything. That's what the Buddha had to do. That's what he discovered in his heart, that is the foundation of his life, that he is the pure light of the void. And so that's when he croaked, he went to the pure light of the void, supposedly. I understand that bodhisattvas have the choice of going to the void or coming back and help people in the world. That's the choice of the bodhisattva, to come back and suffer, to help people through the world. You know that?
No.
They're all Buddhas. They've chosen to come back. Isn't that nice of them? Because this really is a shithole. I'm sorry. No, I'm not. So I mentioned that it's possible for those who've transcended ego identity, which is constituted by all those things I just mentioned, and others. And they have accomplished what St. Paul admonished when he said, those who would lose their souls will gain their souls. And what did he mean by that? Those who let go, just let go. But it's not easy to let go because, as we know, our sense of identity is caught up with a thought system that supports it. And the thought system comes from memory, and the memory comes from various things like hurts. And so we remain stuck in certain areas, and we take those into our death. That's a thing that they don't bother to address here. Maybe that's the difference between going into another super system in a different dimension, and therefore another embodied life in another dimension, or just going back to the matrix itself. I've used how many times the bubbles on the ocean. We're little bubbles on the ocean. Do we really disappear as bubbles? Maybe we continue as bubbles by just shifting the subatomic energy from one dimension to another. I think it's all possible,
right?
Because that level of material existence is just oozing paradoxes. Okay, they mentioned the split screen paradox, so that's only one. I can't recount them. I would let somebody who's expert in this just recount the various paradoxes that you perceive or you encounter at the subatomic level, especially when human consciousness is imposed on it.
And that's what I was going to say, is right. For those that are listening to this and wondering the context of it, the human consciousness, your ability to perceive reality in its purest form does not exist in in the same way that your tangible physicality exists, and so it doesn't have the same limitation as the tangible existence. And so what we're diving into is, what is the limitation of that?
Yeah, I mean, this is conjecture, but it raises the strong possibility. Stuart Hameroff raises a strong possibility that there could be a kind of immortality, or or at least a continuation. I don't know about absolute immortality. I mean, the whole universe comes to an end at some point, right? But certainly a long-lasting run of consciousness, self-conscious consciousness, ego consciousness. It can, and that's that coincides with the theories of karma from the East. You know, you go from one life to another to another. I've maintained that you don't go anywhere. There is only one consciousness, like one space. The only thing that goes forward is your dynamic, your needs, your drives, your attachments. They continue to go forward, and the consciousness gets absorbed into that again.
Well, it would seem that if we dig into Gnosticism for a little bit, that if the human organism is a fluctuating, like we were talking about last time, it's like a surface level living thing, like a moss bacteria type thing on the planet,
right?
And we're all living as separative beings, and then we bring the word atonement into it. And what that could mean.
What does that?
It could mean essentially
suffering,
overcoming the suffering of separateness, right?
Yeah,
and
you're right.
And what is the process
Where
of that?
Where did you get that? Did you get that from A Course in Miracles?
No, I don't know.
Because that's the basis of A Course in Miracles. Atonement means coming to be at one with the infinite.
Right.
And that is the atonement. You don't have to go through the cross and all the rest of it.
Right.
One guy did that. Okay, you can maintain that. You can hold on to your religion too, but this will teach you an entirely different level of understanding the spirit of the whole thing.
And I think that the practice on a daily basis of getting to that point is to essentially have compassion for the suffering that everybody is facing on a daily basis. And I know it's a hell of a task to overcome that.
Especially if their suffering is attacking you.
Right, it's conflict, right? Certainly I'm not apart from this myself. But I don't know, it would seem to me that the task is the same as what Christ was saying. Not to just be, Christian about it or anything, but it's like, everything's in the ethical foundation.
Right, and the ethical foundation comes from your knowing something about the other, because that, as I've maintained in my teaching of ethics, the way to understand, to have some grounding in an ethical background is to realize that you are in relationship with others who are just like yourself at the heart. And if you can be honest and have a real sense of relationship to others, you can begin to have a life that is moral, because then when you realize they are just like yourself, is it okay to harm them, to lie to them, to steal from them, to break promises? You see? No, you wouldn't want any of that done to yourself.
It's reciprocal, if nothing else.
It's more than, you're right.
It's more than that. But
you're right. The way people would hear it is certainly reciprocal.
They don't want it to come back to them. However, when you project it out, you still are doing harm.
You can maintain a position of enlightened selfishness, okay? There's a book I read when I was a kid called The Enlightened Despots. And in other words, people who are going to be, and you find this in studies of ethics, you get all this stuff in the books, as I did. I mean, the guy who sells something, and he's honest about selling stuff, not because he's such a great guy, but because he knows that if he's honest about it, he'll get more customers, he'll be trusted, etc. So there's a selfishness involved in it. I mean, there are lots of strategies used by the ego. The ego's using, you can't count them, can you? Because it's all about self-significance and self-esteem and comfort and just advancing oneself as one perceives advancement. But to go beyond it is to actually, to me, to attain to the hallmark of a higher state of consciousness. What is that hallmark as far as I'm concerned? The ability to love open-heartedly without condition. And yes, these little creatures, I said this before, I'm sure, this little creature is an instrument. Everything's an instrument according to existentialists.
Right.
And the more you look at it, the more you realize it. Everything is there for a purpose or non-purpose. It doesn't suit your purpose, you dismiss it.
Right.
Okay, it's your value system at work that makes instrumental. Now, what's the value system that causes me to have this little monster on my lap so often? Is it because of the love she gives me? I love the love she gives me, but the health that I experience comes from the love I give her. I can actually feel it in my chest. That's what the heart chakra is. You can actually feel it. One of my characters in my latest book was a woman whose heart chakra was the universe expanding all the time because she gave love to a dying child in Syria for 5 hours. And that was her reward. She never anticipated it. So, you know, the love you give is the medicine you take, is something I've said. And so the instrumentality of this little wild woman is for her to evoke my love. Thank you. And so I'm her servant. And that's fine, because she's really a lot less demanding than a lot of other females I've known in the human persuasion. Anyway, we could talk about the transcendence of the ego, but I want to just get to the end of this, and then we can. So, from where I left off about those who would lose their souls and gaining their souls, if Hameroff is right, consciousness is pre-existent throughout the entire field, and it emerges, quote unquote, through the advent of the human brain structures that like release it, I suppose you could say. Consciousness and its wisdom are all around us all the time, and in fact penetrating us. Thus, our brains do not construct understanding, but instead discover it. The brain is a receiver and not a creator of mind and its contents. And that, we know about that, right?
Proto-consciousness is what you're describing.
It emerges out of proto-consciousness.
Right.
But because of the structure of our brain, we can do so much more with it. But it's all there. Remember, I keep referring back to Aristotle with this. Whatever comes out as an effect was potentially there in the cause.
Right.
And if you get geniuses and extremely high beings, go back to the cause to look for it. Look for the foundation of it. I have to do that. That's philosophy to me. I have to go to the foundation. And so it's all there in the proto-consciousness. And thus, if I continue that line of thinking, a romantic could say that consciousness is a prima facie fact of the universe. And then self-awareness at the highest level implies the matrix, Mother Ocean, the Father Furnace, however you want to look at it, that is aware of itself in the lives of various brain beings, limited by human brains, but not limited to them. There may be other brains in the universe that are extraordinary, and I would think so. I mean, for us to assume that we are the pinnacle of all creation is just to be a medievalist. So,
perceiving only the dimensions that we can perceive, etc. You know, only seeing in front of us, and
right.
You know, our limitations.
The other night, I did something, I spoke into this treacherous thing that just erases many of my recordings.
Mm-hmm.
But I did do one the other night. These brains are quite remarkable. And it was all about Hameroff, about what he was saying. And I took it into another realm. I took it into the question about God. And I'd replay it later on and recite it more precisely, yeah. But basically, I've been looking at it this way, that I look at the atheists and I look at many of the theists, and I see the same thing. I see the same trap. I've said this in my writings, one of my books. They have a version of God that is just an insult to God. It is so limited.
Limited, right.
It is so incredibly finite,
mm-hmm.
and they therefore have manhandled it, and some of them have thrown it out the window, and think that they're so righteous because it's obviously not a true thing. They realize it's not true, and the other ones have exalted it to the point where it's the cult of the personality,
right.
And which is nothing more than projections of their own self-idealization.
Well, I would assume that at some point they are projecting an authority above them, outward, separate from them, and there's a betrayal in their mind as to what should happen in the world. They've been betrayed by this authority at some point in time, and therefore completely reject the entire.
I'll bet a lot of agnostic young people would agree with that one. That's their experience, right? They're so disappointed. It's like one of the characters in one of Dostoevsky's books, The Brothers Karamazov. He says God doesn't exist, and if he did exist, he wouldn't deserve to exist. And it's an obvious thing. And I had my Andy Santoro, who's a real guy, a real atheist, a guy I drank beer with for years, and a guy who had been in the service in World War II, and a machine gunner on the nose gunner of a B-29, flying from Burma into China to bomb the Japanese 120 times. And he thought, well, I made him in my book to be a guy. It's a true story. One night he got so drunk on camp and on base that he spent the entire night in the latrine in the Outward John, and there was a bombing raid all around. And when he got out in the morning, everything was destroyed. A lot of guys were killed, and he never got a scratch because he was too busy throwing up all night.
Wow.
Oh, you think that's a good story? No, that's a prelim. So in the book, I made him a God-fearing guy because he was a 20-year-old when he went in when the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. And he was a good boy. He's a good Italian boy from Federal Hill. Tough guy. Used to have all kinds of terrific, explosive fights with big guys over very important things, like who was the better hitter, Ted Williams or Joe DiMaggio. And then he goes into the service. I love this guy. I love this. This was such a golden-hearted person that I knew in my life. Short guy, thick like a small tree on a mountaintop. Strong. And he hung around with Bull Mignon, 300 pounds of quick as a cat violence, built like a wine cask. His brother was the original Bull Mignon, who actually fought Joe Louis on his way up. Lost a split decision to Joe Louis. Tough family, tough guys. And Andy had been in the service, and I told you about that. And in the book, I made him into a God-fearing, God's on my side. Here's a sign. God wants me to do his work. I go into battle against these rotten Japanese, these torturers, these monsters of suffering. That's how he saw them. And the Japanese army were horrible people to doing atrocities to people. So they flew missions from Burma, Myanmar now, to into China to bomb the Japanese every few days, 2 or 3 missions a week. And they went 120 times and they came back. The plane was full of bullet holes. And one time they went with a squadron of B-29s. They went over and they bombed a hillside that had an encampment, and they just probably killed most of the people, most of the Japanese soldiers. 12 or 14 B-29s flying over a hill and just dropping bombs on top of the whole area. And they were feeling pretty good about themselves, and they were on their way back. It's like a 400-mile, 350-mile trip, and they're maybe a couple 100 miles out, and they're going by the mountains. And the captain says, this is all true. Look down to your right, gentlemen. The Japanese army's down there trooping around that narrow trail on the side of the mountain. They were coming up on maybe a trail that was less than several feet in diameter. He said, we're going to go in, and Andy, you take the first ones. He's the nose gunner. And then so-and-so and so-and-so, you fill in and you get your share. And he throttled back so as to go very slowly, several hundred yards out, and Andy said he was 50 caliber. He said, I was never so accurate. I couldn't miss. They were pinned to the wall, and I killed them. I killed at least 200 to 300 of them. And he was happy about it. They got back, they celebrated, they all got drunk. The officers, the captain and the co-captain would come in with the beer, and they'd all get drunk together at night and drink. They were like brothers. And when they got drunk, one of the kids said, let's go out and kill some more Japs, Captain. He's drunk as a skunk. He said, just sober up. He said, when we go out next time, you remember how scared you are when we fly. I won't be scared anymore, Captain. I'm not scared anymore. Why not? It's what Andy told me. What's that? God's on our side. We're doing sacred work for God. And Captain said, well, I don't know. He asked Andy, is that true? Andy said, I got my reasons, Captain. He said, okay, maybe you're right, but I've seen things that make me think that God doesn't give a shit at all. And so a couple of nights later, they had come back from another bombing mission, safe, done their thing. And the captain came back after a while, and he said, I got some news. He said, last week we came upon a bunch of Japanese soldiers along the ridge. They weren't Japanese soldiers, they were American prisoners of war. Now, Andy told me this story in the drinking hole where I used to hang out with him after I'd work out at the Y. And he told me without any emotion, but he killed, and he was a good guy, good heart. I saw the way he was with people, a good-hearted person. A lot of love in him, brought up by good mother and father. And it broke his heart. So in my book, I made him an atheist. I never asked him why he was an atheist, but there's a good reason as any. And there's a scene in the book. I hope I'm not giving it away, but if people want to read the whole book, it's a great book. Nemesis in the Mirror. There's a scene where he talks about this, and then then the guy who's talking with him, the main character, is listening to him, and he starts to cough. He smokes cigarettes constantly. True. And he eventually has a kind of paroxysm, and he falls unconscious. And then he awakens a little later, and he's totally confused, asking for his mother, and trying to be sure of everything being okay. And what was going on? I don't remember what was happening, he said. And the guy, the main character, Rennie, tells him that we were talking about God and the war. That's when he became an atheist. And he said God and the war. God wasn't there in the war. He was probably in some ladies' tea club, but he wasn't in the war. And then there's more. but that's one of my favorite stories. It's a true story.
Mm.
Imagine that happening to you, that you killed 300 of your comrades. And he had said earlier, family, everybody in the service was family. All Americans are family, but then the guys are, because guys fight in the war for each other.
Mm.
You know that, right?
Mm-hmm. Right. Well, so thus is the reason for digging in a little bit deeper in the investigation of
There's so much in
life.
the world. There's so much in the world, and it demands something. If you don't meet its demand, in my opinion, of self-understanding, you're really missing the point of being alive. I want to put a new point on my cards. You know, I have shadow work and educational services. I want to put beneath that sui noti. You know, it's from Socrates, know thyself.
Mm.
Know thyself, sui noti.
Mm.
The unexamined life is not worth living, said Socrates.